Hi everyone. In this video, we are going to discuss about IAM Assume Role in AWS. Let's see the contents. We will discuss about AWS IAM, then STS Security Token Service, Assume Role, its illustration, how to assume a role in AWS, steps to be followed to assume a role, and a use case. Okay, now let's see what is IAM. IAM, Identity and Access Management. It's an Amazon cloud offering that manages access to compute, storage, and other application services in the cloud. IAM's primary capability is access and permissions. Essential functions: authentication and authorization. Authentication: it validates the identity of a user. Once a user is authenticated, authorization defines the access rights of that particular user. And coming to principal entities: users, groups, roles, and policies. These are considered as principal entities. How we will access IAM? Via AWS Management Console, AWS CLI, SDKs, and APIs we can access IAM. Now moving to Security Token Service, STS. Security Token Service is an extension of IAM and is one of the several web services offered by AWS that does not incur any cost to use. But unlike IAM, there is no user interface on the AWS console to manage and interact with STS. Rather, all interaction is done entirely through one of several extensive SDKs or directly using common HTTP protocol. The main purpose and function of STS is to use temporary security credentials for AWS resources to trusted and authenticated entities. Coming to various functions of STS. It issues temporary security credentials, automatically expires the tokens, issues that dynamically, and unusable after a period of time that is very particular. Regularly it rotates the access keys, and no need of storing the access keys within the application, and it can distribute access keys to external entities as well. Overall, it enables cross-delegation and access. And as an example, if any user with their cloud, they're using a set of data, and if they want to access your bucket and no need to provide the entire fixed access to your bucket, and for a short period of time, you can delegate that particular IAM user to access your bucket. So this is what the simple logic behind a security token service by ensuring a kind of assume role to the IAM user. Assume role. Assume role API will return a set of temporary security credentials to enable the access of AWS resources which normally the user might not have the access to. AWS root user cannot call assume role and need to have IAM user role to call assume role. And this will return a set of temporary security credentials which contain access key, secret access key, and session token. Any particular user, partner, customer can make use of their IAM credentials to assume a role with the help of security token service. In this process, the IAM user will get a temporary credential for a predefined short period of time to access the critical resources in the cloud by assuming the role. Now let's see the detailed illustration of assume role. A root user can create IAM user with policy or role assigned to it. In such case, for example, if no policy assigned, no resource will be accessible. If limited policy or permission sets assigned to the IAM user, those limited resources will be accessible, but not the critical resources. When we see assume role, the same IAM user can assume a role and access the critical resources till the token expire. Token is all about the session duration. So there would be a temporary credential available to the IAM user by which he can assume the role and access the resources for a short period of time. So how it is happening? The root user is creating IAM user. Root user is also creating a role with required resource access enabled. So IAM user can assume the role and he would receive temporary credential, and using that temporary credential, he will be accessing the critical resources within the cloud. So this is how assume role works. How to assume a role in AWS? So here we are looking into a particular scenario. Create IAM user with no or limited permissions applied. So how we will do that? Go to console or CLI that we can use to create a user. And so here we consider a username as my test user and not assigning any permission. So he will get an access key and secret key and just note it down. With that particular IAM user, if you try accessing a resource, say S3 bucket, passing the credentials obtained, you would not successfully get the access. I mean, you would get an error that the access is denied. In this case, create a role and set permissions for that role for accessing S3. So here, just go to IAM and the roles, then create a role. Say the role name is my test role, then permission is Amazon S3 full access. After creating the role, go to edit trust relationship of the created role, and instead of the service, provide the user there by passing the user ARN, so that particular user ARN would be able to access the S3 bucket in future through assuming the role. Try accessing S3 bucket now, again using the same credential, I mean the access key and the secret key of the IAM user, but you will not get the access that we all know because we didn't attach any permission to the user. In this case, the security token service plays a critical role. Use STS to pass the role ARN and obtain the credentials, that is new access key and secret key that came via assume role, and provide the duration in seconds for the expiry of the temporary credential. Now with those temporary credentials, if you try to access the S3 bucket, you will get the access. So this is how an IAM user can assume a role and access a critical resource normally he didn't access earlier. So now if you want to see the detailed steps, let's go to step-by-step details. Step number 1, create IAM user. As we discussed earlier, it can be from the console or it can be from the CLI. Now from the console, you go to IAM section or users and add user section. Provide the username and access type as programmatic access and create the user account. And then you can see here I have not applied any permissions and I successfully created the user and I got the access key ID and secret access key for my test user. If you wish to create it from CLI, you can make use of the command AWS IAM create user username and your username, my test user. And if you want to obtain the access key or if you want to get the access key of your test user, just put AWS IAM create access key, then username my test user, then you can configure that. So these are the steps to be followed for creating a user. Now step number 2, try accessing a resource, say S3 bucket, passing the credentials obtained. Now you have an access key and a secret key. Using that, if you try to access S3 bucket, it will give an error because this particular IAM user does not have the permissions attached to access S3 bucket. Now step 3, create a role and set permissions for the role for S3 full access. For that, go to IAM, roles, create a role, say my test role, and provide the Amazon S3 full access into it. Once that role has been created, the next step would be edit trust relationships of that created role. You can see trust relationship tab, click on edit, and there you see principal as service earlier. So instead of service, replace it with AWS, then the user ARN of that particular user you created. So from the user properties, you can obtain the user ARN value and paste it over here, save it. Then again, you try accessing the S3 bucket by using the same credentials of IAM user. Will it give the access? No, because we have not attached the policy to IAM user. We just created a role. And now how the IAM user can assume that role, that is using STS role, security token service. Use STS role to pass the role ARN and obtain the credentials, that is new access key, new secret key that came via assume role, and provide the duration in seconds for the expiry of the temporary credential. You can see the command here. So using the credits object, you can use the STS role, that is the use STS role, passing the role ARN, and the role session name you can assume as my role session name, and with the duration, and pass the ARN into it, and you can see that the S3 bucket is accessible. And now we have provided duration seconds as 900. So that is all about around 15 minutes. So after 15 minutes, if you try to access the same bucket again, you will not be able to access, and it will give you an error that the token has expired. So this is how we assume a role for an existing IAM user. Now, a particular use case. Principal can be IAM user or service like EC2 with no permission, right? Normally. In that case, assume comes into the picture by assuming a role like R1. The same principal can be IaaS user or service like EC2 can assume product environment capabilities, and he can make changes into that environment. He can deploy something into that environment. If the same user wants to make some changes into pre-production environment, he can assume a role R2 and do that. If the same user wants to make some modification in the development environment, he can assume another role called R3. So without creating multiple user accounts or without giving full access of a particular environment to a user, we can make the user to access each environment by enabling him to assume a set of roles as per the need for a particular time duration. This is considered as a very effective use case of assume role for a IAM user. So we believe you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching it.